I have Jason Kabbes. I met Jason a few years ago, becoming part of the nonprofit Green Environmental Outreach. And he's one of the most interesting people that I've probably met in the last 5 or so years. So his bio, Jason Kabbes is a co-founder and senior vice president of Ohio Clean Leaf LLC, CEO of Diamond Science Extracts, and co-managing partner of Bridge Street Collective. A proud Springfield native, Jason started his cannabis advocacy efforts while attending the Ohio State University. I'll give you that since I went to OU. serving
Okay.
as president, serving as president of the student group for a better Ohio. Jason holds the degrees Bachelor of Science, graduated in 2006, and Master of Science, graduated in 2010 from OSU School of Earth Sciences, with a concentration in mineral physics and geophysical chemistry. His research has been featured in journals and broadcasts such as Astrophysical Journal and Science Friday. Jason started his cannabis cultivation journey as a medical cannabis cultivator in Oregon, finally fine-tuning his growing style according to his passion for true quality, integrated wellness, and a strict adherence to the scientific method. When Ohio House Bill 523 passed in 2016, Jason saw the opportunity to practice his craft in his home state while partnering alongside an old Springfield friend, and so began Ohio Clean Leaf. Jason has since co-founded several craft cannabis businesses in other East Coast and Midwest markets, including New Jersey, Missouri, and Rhode Island. Well, welcome, Jason. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Good to be here.
Yes, sir. Thanks for attending. How's your day going so far?
Not bad, man. Not bad. Just getting up and moving, really. I'm calling in from Oregon, so out here on the West Coast. Just getting the day rolling. Gonna take
What
care of
time
some
is it for you out
out
there?
today. Get some exercise in. That's about it.
There we go. There we go. So just give us a little bit of background. Obviously, we see your collegiate background. How was it growing up in Springfield? How was it growing up in Ohio, being in the cannabis space? How long have you been in the cannabis space before, obviously, the education part?
hmm Yeah, I mean, depending on how you define it, I've been in the cannabis space for quite a long time. I got, as you mentioned earlier, I got involved relatively early on in Ohio. And then kind of, put that effort on the shelf and went back and finished some degrees. And then got back in the cannabis space, I'd say in 2010 is when I got my first cultivation license out here in Oregon. So after I finished my graduate studies, I did some research and some teaching at Ohio State, worked at some government laboratories actually as well to get some of that research done. And then when, like I said, I moved out to the West Coast and started to integrate cannabis into my professional life.
How was that transition in terms of going from I guess, a non-legal state in Ohio and then going out to Oregon? What was that transition like for you?
I mean, well, for me personally, it was quite liberating, being in a state, where uh obviously, the war on drugs was still a very, active thing centered around cannabis.
Yeah.
Not able to practice the craft that you want to practice back there. And, just seeing some of the bad ramifications that come from the illegalization. So moving to the West Coast was, I'd say, liberating in a way. Just from an emotional and mental well-being standpoint, it was just much different not having to, have that illegality over your head,
Right.
even just as a medical patient.
And talking about the war on drugs, because I feel like it's still kind of taboo, and we don't, obviously you have the race lines, right? I feel because sometimes you have your urban communities, you have your more Caucasian communities where we don't necessarily see the criminalization of folks in cannabis like that in the suburbs or some white
Mhm.
communities as opposed to black, Mexican. How would
Mhm.
you say that impacted you? Because I would assume, since you've been in the cannabis industry before legally, which many of us have, you
Mhm.
probably have friends. How did that impact you? The war on drugs, was that something that you were afraid of? Was that something that you were aware of? How did it impact,
Yeah,
your
I mean,
movement?
it was definitely something, that I saw on a day to day,
Yeah,
just in my life and in my neighborhood,
yeah,
just kind of based on, where I lived in Columbus.
right,
I lived in predominantly high crime neighborhoods, just low economic income neighborhoods. It's where I could
right,
afford to live, as I was going through getting my schooling and whatnot. So I kind of saw it on a day to day.
right,
So yeah, I firsthand witnessed, the over policing, of neighborhoods like that, and just
right,
kind of everything that the ripple effect that comes from that.
right,
And cannabis being illegal, being highly illegal back then, that was at times just an easy route to lead to over policing, you know.
right. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting too. Now, obviously, we have legalization, but being here in Ohio, seeing how I guess the medical market started, it's just kind of like out of nowhere, right? Like you go from the war on drugs to now in 2016, we get medical in Ohio. But then there's like no real education, I feel like, behind it. So obviously you being the co-founder of a cannabis company, how has that impacted how you because the markets are different, right? You're in Oregon versus being here. How has that impacted you and how you move um, in the market? Is it something that you see as an opportunity to be able to be one of the first, or is it something that's kind of hindered you in the space in Ohio to being able to voice, your thoughts and opinions on what should be done in the market versus what's being done currently?
Well, I mean, just to kind of take a step back and speak big picture, I think that the evolving political landscape in Ohio has definitely been an opportunity for
Mm-hmm.
me and many others. You know, I consider a very House Bill 523, I consider a very large win just for the
Mm-hmm.
Ohio community in general. The fact that we were able to pass a medical cannabis law and
Right.
bring it into realization is huge.
For
You know,
sure.
I can honestly say I don't know if I ever thought we'd see something like that in Ohio in my lifetime,
Yeah.
if looking back 20 years. So I think that's just a huge movement forward from a political and from a public health standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we really need to just give House Bill 523 and the whole medical program its own minute in the spotlight. I think it's a huge
Right.
success. But if a question is, really more geared toward what do I see happening right now,
Mm-hmm.
from this transition from a medical only state to a medical and adult use state, uh, I see the opportunities are absolutely tenfold compared to what they were when we're going from fully illegal into a medical program.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot more opportunities for involvement. New companies that are going to want to get in are going to, I think, have an opportunity for that as time goes on. Um, and really, uh, from a public, social justice and reparative justice standpoint, um, we're not going to have as much over policing and folks
Mm-hmm.
going to jail for cannabis possession.
Right.
And it's been decriminalized in Ohio for quite some time, so it's
Yeah.
not necessarily easy to go to jail for just small amounts of cannabis possession in Ohio. And Ohio has been kind of forward thinking on that for a while, but this full on legalization is still taking another grand step forward in that direction, and that's
Yeah.
good.
For sure.
Nobody wants cannabis charges on their record. It's tough to get a job. It makes life more difficult, if you have any kind of drug offense on your record.
For sure. Now, when you started Ohio Clean Leaf and came back to Ohio, how did that make you feel? Like, how was that? Because obviously, if you're underground,
I mean, it
and
was
then
great,
you,
man. It was great. I mean, yeah, I felt like I was a champion of the program. I very much wanted to be a part of the program as soon as when it was in its inception. I was going to every single state meeting. Like you heard in my bio, I was linking up with an old friend from high school, and we were just kind of, talking about, yeah, this would be a dream if we can kind of put something like this together. You
right,
know, so when it actually became a reality, and we got our team fully put together, got our capital partners, got licensed, started building out the facility. Yeah, it seemed like a dream starting to come true. It was wonderful.
dope. Now, tell the people because obviously it's a process, and being an entrepreneur being in this space is not easy, right? Cultivation, I think too, with home grow coming on board, I feel like a lot of people just assume cultivating cannabis is something that's very simple and easy. But when you're on a large scale like you, like what's that process like, to ensure quality control, to ensure that you have, the best people in place? How did you go about the development of, or how do you go about the development of, let's say, your team? Let's say, knowing that, you're producing a great product. How is that process for you? What's, let's say, the cost of, getting, because obviously in Ohio, we had a limited license. So not many people could get a medical license.
Mhm.
But how is that whole process for you, and how did that, let's say, impact you being, let's say, on the other side of it, where it was just, hey, we're just doing this maybe for fun, or we're just doing this just to, just to smoke, but now it's a business. How's that process been for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's there's always a steep learning curve, when you're building out any type of business and
Right.
trying to train people that don't necessarily have the same background as the founder does, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, like I had mentioned, I was a licensed cultivator in the medical program in Oregon pretty early on. It was very small scale, and I was only allowed to cultivate for me as a patient and another patient that I was caregiving for, but I learned a lot of the trade secreted steps along the way on how to grow what I thought was top shelf cannabis, right?
Right.
Just from years, harvest after harvest after harvest, just learning my tricks of the trade. So having to instill that type of knowledge set to folks that don't necessarily have that work history is a steep learning curve in and of itself.
Right.
And we experienced that in Ohio and other states that we've turned on since Ohio. That's definitely a thing because we're a West Coast group, and on the operational side, we're a West Coast group that have been doing this for
Mhm.
a while. And Ohio being the first state that we kind of started, you have to bring people up to speed inherently,
Right. Right.
But I had great partners in Ohio, and they took to it like that.
Yeah.
Even the folks with zero cultivation experience took to it really quickly, and really helped stand the business up to be something better than if I would have been if I would have had to do it on my own.
Right.
So the non-cannabis folks, they brought other stuff to the table from an intellectual property standpoint.
Right. And from a business, I guess, as a businessman, as an entrepreneur, as a community advocate, how would you say, going about, because transitioning from being illegal to legal, is still a steep learning curve, right? We still have to educate large groups of people who have been
Right.
conditioned to believe that this is a bad thing, that this plant, produces bad people, right? Or the people
Right.
that consume it are bad. But you working as an executive and being able to lead folks who may consume cannabis, what have you seen that transition be like in terms of, the type of people maybe that you work with, or just the type of people who consume cannabis? What's that relationship been like in transitioning over to the legal side of things?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, your question was about, social thought and stigma around cannabis and how's that
Yeah.
evolving, as things legalize, and really what are our jobs as executives, maybe what's our responsibility we take on in pushing that conversation forward.
Yeah.
And for me and for the companies that I've started, I've always tried to have it be the intersection between industry and community is how we push that forward.
Yeah.
Okay, so whether it's, you know, me being a part of the nonprofit I work on with you,
Mhm.
Green Environmental Outreach, working in, the city that I'm from, in a neighborhood I used to live in,
Right.
you or whether it's in choosing the type of partners you're going to bring on from a co-ownership perspective when you're starting a new entity in a new
Mhm.
marketplace. I think that is a very, very strong and important opportunity to push the conversation forward
Yeah.
because as an executive, I think I have an open playbook on how I want my company to interact with community and
Yeah.
what that community impact could and should be. And I
Mhm.
think that is an effort that has evolved for us as we've gone from state to state.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to thank you too, because obviously, being able to come back to your hometown, which I'm honored to be able to work in Springfield. I knew nothing about Springfield before, I met Kenny, our CEO of Geo. But being able to see the community, one, and how, obviously you have, one side of the tracks that looks really good. And then obviously where we work at on the south side, it's like depressed. But, you see that you're bringing opportunities, you're bringing that ability to have a space where you're hiring folks in the community. And then we have a medical program. So again, this is a public health issue too. When we look at Ohio, we have one of the worst healthcare systems. My degree's in healthcare administration, so I look really deep into the data of health and wellness. And I believe, obviously being a former athlete, that cannabis has always been something that has helped me with pain, helped me with trauma, PTSD. So seeing you being able to come back and help your community, I think is huge. And I know that you've wanted to grow a little bit. Do you think you'll have that opportunity to be able to grow your business here a little bit more? How does that look in terms of being able to grow and have an even larger impact in the region that you're
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do think that opportunity is coming. The adult use rule set hasn't been fully realized yet.
in? Right.
So speculatively, it looks like, yeah, there's a lot of opportunity to expand, for all companies in the state,
Right.
tier 2 and tier 1 cultivators. It looks like we will have an opportunity to grow more cannabis, to reach more end users, so to speak. And it sounds like we're going to bring on some more dispensaries in the state as well over time. You
Yeah.
know, um, Obviously serving a medical demand is only a fraction of the demand you're going to see in an adult use market.
Right.
So yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of option for growth for the companies in the market and just for the market as a whole.
Yeah. And what do you, so since I talked about athletics, I know you're an athlete. We played in the 3-on-3 cannabis tournament a few months back. Um, I like to talk. I started something called Athletes in Cannabis, really
Mhm.
to help as an initiative, because there's a lot of athletes that consume cannabis, but also, athletes are typically guinea pigs, right? When it comes to medical, they'll do anything to ensure that athletes can perform on the court or on the field. How have you seen in your personal journey and just being in the space that you are? How do you see cannabis helping in the athletic space and just helping in the overall health and wellness space? Because we do have, obviously we force pills a lot in our medical system,
Right.
right? It's more instead of prevention, we try to fix it after the problem's there. But how have you seen cannabis help, prevent certain things or help folks in their health and wellness journey? How have you seen cannabis be an impact?
I mean, just huge, overall huge. I think from a physical standpoint, but also just a mental, emotional standpoint as well. And I think that's for any end user, and also specifically for athletes, that I've spoken with personally, high school, collegiate, and professional athletes. Um, like you had mentioned, they'll force any kind of pill on you just to make you keep going. But a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times, athletes didn't necessarily want to talk about it, but the easiest thing for them to just consume something and keep going was to consume some cannabis.
Right.
And that's going to help them recover, from maybe a tough game, the physical soreness, but also, like I mentioned, the mental emotional aspect of it, dealing
Mm-hmm.
with the stress of being a professional or a semi-professional athlete. Not that I was one, but folks that I've spoken with, just
Right.
dealing with the stress of that high intensity environment, the ups and the downs that come from it,
Right.
the call it PTSD, if you will, just from dealing
Mm-hmm.
with the whole process.
Right.
Cannabis is, mitigate that. At least that's what I've seen.
Right. For sure. And I mean, as a player, before I got into the weeds of it, the science behind it, and, got friends who are executives of cannabis companies, I started consuming when I was about 16, but I was in private school. I'm a clean cut black kid. My parents had told me, stay away from the weed, you know what I mean? Because I'm trying to get a scholarship. But then
Right.
it's just like anything, somebody tells you not to do it as a teenager, you're going to try it. Same thing with alcohol. And it's like I tried it for the first time. And I was like, man, this makes me feel amazing, right? Like you get the laughs, or you just get the sensation of your body relaxing. And at that time, I was full on in football and training, and so I was already having injuries. And I was like, man, this like somebody's lying to me. You know what I mean? And so, like,
Exactly. And that's,
so
and in my
okay,
opinion, sorry to interrupt, but in my opinion, that's, why historically we maybe messed up a little bit in the whole miseducation, of the war
right,
on drugs. Because like you said, well, man, if this cannabis thing is not really all that bad, someone's been lying to me.
right,
But if what children are taught is that everything is bad and they're equating, all Schedule Ones to be the same, cannabis is just as bad as everything else, right? Like,
mm-hmm,
oh, well, they're lying to me on cannabis, maybe they're lying to me on other stuff.
right,
And that's the gateway in and of itself is the miseducation, you
for
know.
sure.
And not to cut you off or anything like
No,
that,
you're
but
good. Go ahead.
I'm glad that from a social and community standpoint, that conversation is moving forward.
Right,
We haven't gotten any rescheduling yet, but there's obviously a conversation at hand right now that's under review.
yeah,
Um, Looking deeply at the medical efficacy of cannabis and saying, maybe it's not, on the level of all these other things. And then hopefully
right,
that'll be the beginning of some re-education
right.
societally.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's, obviously the huge thing, right? Because you can have folks in these silos doing what they're doing, but if you don't have the federal government supporting it, right, or backing it, or distributing the information, or allowing people to be more open about it, it still kind of hangs that, that negative stigma and that cloud over the industry or over the plant, which is again why I like to have these conversations, because if you have conversations with real human beings who've come into real contact with the plant, real people, you understand that this is benefiting not one just you, but it's benefiting the community, it's benefiting other people in a lot of dynamic ways. How have you seen personally cannabis maybe benefit you, your local community, or community at large, in terms of we talk about health and wellness, mental health, PTSD? How have you seen that since legalization? Obviously, West Coast, maybe you could speak to that as well.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think we're just starting to really get into it as far as the
Right.
ripple effect and how it's going to benefit society. Um, the easy answers, in areas of high opioid use, we're seeing those numbers go down.
Mm-hmm.
We know that THC and CBD does help people get off of opioids. So, once again, where I'm from, Springfield, there's been a bad drug problem there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but now folks that have kind of gone through some of those programs do have an opportunity to get a medical card
Right.
and, do have an opportunity to use THC and CBD and maybe instead of Suboxone,
Right.
to wean themselves off of what it is that they're trying to leave behind.
Yeah.
So I think that's an easy answer as far as, some immediate effects.
Right.
Um, I don't think Ohio is far enough evolved yet as far as just having the program have enough history behind it to see a lot of the economical effects. But if we can look at Colorado as a case study, Colorado pretty early on was like, we're going to set some money aside for schools and so on and so forth.
Right.
And the societal impact has been really huge there from an economic standpoint since
Right.
cannabis has become legalized.
Yeah.
They early on said, you know what, our tax money is going toward X, Y, and Z.
Mm-hmm.
And they've seen the benefits from that wholeheartedly.
Right.
And what you're having now in Colorado is politicians that were very much so against it 10 years ago, now saying, you know what, I was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I can speak to the actual community and societal impact in a
Right.
positive fashion when I thought it was going to be the devil's lettuce and I thought it was going to lead to, dope heads on the street and whatnot. Like, no,
Right.
it's actually done the opposite. And at the same time, we took that tax revenue and built new schools,
Right.
you know.
Right.
I think we're still pretty early on in the process in Ohio, but I'm hoping that's where we're going to trend,
Yeah.
But some of that stuff is still getting figured out.
Right. Yeah, and definitely with the recent passing of adult use, obviously there's a lot of argument going on right now at the state house because there is pretty much a social equity clause in the new law, basically stating that we want, tax revenue and money to go towards social justice impact, going towards taxes for schools and community development. So I think that'll be huge, and I feel like the same thing will happen that happened in Colorado, right? It's you have these older generations where they just assume like, oh, if we legalize, there are going to be way more kids, consuming cannabis. When we've seen traditionally, when you legalize and you educate, there's actually a reduction in childhood use, teenage use, because now people are willing to have the open conversation with their kids. I would assume that, hey, this is a medicine. This is something that you stay away from because, hey, yeah, or kids are using it, right? Maybe a kid has epilepsy or a kid needs it, and it's not just smoking. I feel like uh, the broader society just assumes that cannabis is just a smokable product. And now we have so many different ways. Can you speak to the ways of, let's say, ingesting cannabis? Because obviously, being from the scientific background, all the different ways. So, what are some of the different ways that folks can get cannabis into their system so they're
Yeah, of
not walking around
course.
smelling like a
I mean,
cloud?
first off, if you don't mind, I just want to comment on something you had mentioned, teen use.
Yeah.
Uh, I can't quote studies directly offhand. I'd have to just look at my sources really quickly. But I've seen a few studies, though, that have looked at states that have legalized, and they said that, yeah, teen use has actually dropped.
Hmm.
Not dramatically, but it
Right.
has turned downward. And I think that's a good thing.
Hmm.
I don't think cannabis should be consumed until an individual is of age and their brains are developed, right? Unless, like you
Sure.
mentioned, they have a very specific scenario like childhood epilepsy.
Right.
Okay, so I just want to be straight on the record about that. I
Yeah.
think that that is a good thing. As it gets destigmatized, maybe it's not as attractive for young folks to go sneak off and do it because they've learned about it a little bit,
Hmm.
and maybe that's something that I mess with a little later in life.
Right.
To answer your question though, as far as the different ways to consume, yeah, it's amazing, really, how much methods of administration have moved forward over the past 5, 10 years.
Yeah.
Um, Obviously, no, you can smoke and vape, but you can take edibles,
Hmm.
which is nothing new. But something that is new on the edible side of things is you can take, nano emulsified edibles now that have a very, very short onset time,
Hmm.
where we actually break up that molecule into, I'm sorry, break up those groups of molecules into just smaller and smaller and smaller bits to where
Hmm.
they are just digested much more quickly. And then you don't have the 2 hour onset. You have
Hmm.
got a 10 or 15-minute onset, and it's a lot more
Yeah.
predictable your outcome in that regard.
Right.
You're not going to end up overdosing quite the same way.
Right.
Um, but other ways, transdermal patches, I think, are great. That's something new that's kind of come on, and I think
Hmm.
is very big for athletes. Because a lot of times folks don't necessarily want to get intoxicated, but they want the
Right.
healing of THC.
Hmm.
And using it transdermally, you're much more likely to have that type of experience.
Right.
Um, so yeah, I'd say that's a really interesting method of administration. Um, and I'd say even beyond the methods of administration, but also just the active cannabinoids that we're starting to isolate and just starting to research.
Hmm.
I think we're just beginning to turn the page on that, and it's it's
Right.
it's a whole it's a whole new book that we just haven't even delved into, all that far yet.
For
Things like
sure.
CBG, CBN, those all have medical efficacies.
Right.
And like I said, we're just starting to get into them.
Right. Yeah, talk about that a little bit more because, obviously we talk about, CBD came online, hemp and CBD came online a little
Yeah.
early. We hear the conversation about THC and a lot of people talk about THC. But talk about some of those other cannabinoids and what we've seen those be able to do if you can, when it in terms of interacting with the person. Like, how have you seen that grow?
Absolutely.
Because
I mean, we only can speak anecdotally for the most
right.
part right now, as far as what effects we're noticing. There are some companies that are starting to do some studies on minor cannabinoids, and you know, full disclosure, I'm a very small owner in one company that's working on some CBN research right now.
Okay.
Um, But yeah, it's mostly anecdotal. There's
Okay.
not a full body of peer-reviewed literature on the efficacy of these minor cannabinoids just because they're so darn new, right?
Right. And part of
But
that comes down to
totally
research,
speaking,
right?
what was that?
So, and part of that comes down to the federal government allowing more research too, right?
Correct. Yeah, there's just more research getting funded these days, and like I said, some of these molecules are just relatively new to
Yeah.
the scientific community at large.
Yeah.
But To answer your question though, from an anecdotal standpoint, CBN is been, said to be very, very good for sleep. Um, that company that I'm involved with, like I said, they are working on some research in that regard. Um, so that's going to be a big one. I think CBN is going to be very, very prevalent in the minor cannabinoid space for quite some time, and I think I'm thinking it's going to be pretty prevalent in the sleep space.
Yeah.
CBC being another one, I'm anecdotally, again, I'm hearing that it's good for focus. Um, may help control appetite, but once again,
Mhm.
that's just anecdotal. There needs to be a lot of that type of research done.
Right.
Um, yeah, it's almost endless as of right now.
Right.
There are a lot of cannabinoids in that plant. We've learned how to isolate, more than a solid handful of them at this point.
Right.
Uh, and as we kind of cross genetic varieties and do more things in laboratories, we're just learning more and more about this plant and the different, constituents of it, and what the effects of those constituents are.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's big too, because obviously in the conversation, you have a lot of people that are consumed, notice that it makes them feel better, but they don't know why, right? Maybe it helps them sleep. Maybe it helps them with, attention. So focus. I know for me, I consume typically, right, a sativa if I want to go work out or if I need to focus, but indica if I'm feeling extreme pain or I need to relax or come down. Can you speak to, because obviously we also need to get out of that stigma of just sativa and indica. Could you break that down in terms of letting people know terpenes and how important terpenes are
Yeah,
to the
absolutely.
process?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you mentioned, the whole sativa indica hybrid classification scheme is a little bit outdated, you
Right.
know. Um, and what we're starting to realize, is that it's really the non-THC components that are going to dictate whether you have an uplifting versus a sedating, calming, pain killing type of effect when you consume.
Right.
And we think that is due in part a lot to the different cannabinoid ratios, but even more so the terpene ratios that are present,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So what we, used to call a sativa is now likely just a genotype that is, maybe low in myrcene, high in terpenoline.
Hmm.
Um, so yeah, we're now starting to correlate those terpene fractions to the actual sedating or uplifting effects.
Yeah. And how does that go into, let's say, you as a cultivator? Like, how does that go into your process of determining what you're going to grow, what you're going to cultivate versus, what you're not going to cultivate? Does that have any impact?
It does, but
Terpenes?
it really does, but I wish it had more impact.
Yeah.
We're starting, I think, to trend more in that direction as a cannabis community,
Right.
caring more about terpenes. But in all honesty, we are just still really darn focused on THC content. And, I wish, from a purist, I wish we were a little bit farther along and just saying, okay, anything 20% and above THC, we can just consider that, that it has plenty of THC. And let's
Hmm.
look more so into, the terpene profiles and the abundance of said terpenes. Because
Right.
like we had mentioned, they're going to actually deliver the different effects.
Hmm.
Um, a whole bunch of THC without the terpenes to kind of deliver those entourage effects just doesn't do a whole lot for me as a cannabis consumer. Um,
Right.
I'd rather have call it a 24% or even 22% strain
Hmm.
that has 4 or 5% terps of
Right.
terpene really, really work with my endocannabinoid system well, versus
Right.
something that's coming out like 33% THC and 1% terps. That doesn't do
Right.
much.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's too, like, everybody's different, right? And that's why, cannabis is such a special plant because it impacts everybody in such a different way. Now, you said two terms that I'm gonna need you to go over because we're speaking to folks that we're educating right now. So you
Yeah,
said
yeah,
the
sounds good.
entourage effect and you said the
Yes.
endocannabinoid system. What is the endocannabinoid system and what's the entourage effect for people that may not know?
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, I'll do my best to explain it. I'm by
Yeah,
no
yeah.
means a scientist. I'm a traditional scientist by training. But the endocannabinoid system, it is each individual's, uh, I'm sorry, let me rewind. Every individual has an endocannabinoid system that, to my understanding, plays a very, very large part in regulating communication between different systems in your body, helping the different systems in your body achieve homeostasis, right? Um,
Which means balance.
Thank you. Thank you, which means balance, a healthy balance between your systems.
This is one of the
Every
reasons I'm doing this is because, sorry to cut you off, because sometimes, obviously me and we can get very technical, but a lot of times in the community, some of these words, we don't talk about it, right? Like we talk, oh, I'm getting high, I'm smoking, I'm having a good time. But we need to start understanding why.
Yep.
Why does
Yeah,
this
let's
make me
break it
feel
down. Let's
good?
break it down.
Yeah.
So your ECS, your endocannabinoid system, is really, it's kind of like a genetic fingerprint for how your body and your brain is going to take on cannabinoids and terpenes and everything that's in the cannabis plant.
Mhm,
And your ECS is different from mine,
mhm.
right? It's literally like a lock and keyhole type scenario.
Right.
It's almost like I said, is as unique as your genetic fingerprint.
Mhm,
Okay. So one strain is going to have a different effect on you potentially than it does on me, than it does
mhm.
on person X, Y, and Z. So
Yeah.
everyone's ECS is somewhat different. We don't know exactly how that is. Like I said, it's a relatively new science,
Mhm.
but that's my general understanding of the endocannabinoid system. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, the entourage effect, to answer your second question, is what I would just term an individual's response to everything that's in the cannabis plant, right?
Mhm,
So all the different things that link into your ECS, the
mhm.
THC, the CBD, the minor cannabinoids, the terpenes, they all play a part in how your mind and your body reacts to cannabis. Okay. So back to the 40% or 35% THC strain that doesn't have any terps in it versus a 20% THC strain that might have 5-6% terps. Strain number two with the 5 or 6% terps is going to actually have more of an entourage effect to it, okay? Versus a
Mhm.
strain that's just hitting you with THC. A strain that actually we've been really interested in recently on a project I'm working on out in Rhode Island. It's called unicorn poop. And unicorn poop only has like 25% THC, but the total active cannabinoids are around 31%.
Mhm.
Not even counting the terpenes, there are around 6% by abundance active cannabinoids that are not THC. And then on top of that, the terps are through the roof. So consuming just a little bit of unicorn poop, even though the THC might only be at 25%, is going to
Mhm.
hit you. It's going to smack a lot
Mhm.
differently than even taking a dab,
Right.
a high THC dab that might not have a crazy amount of terps in it or that minor cannabinoid profile in it. It just doesn't, or at least me, it doesn't smack me the same way. So that
Right.
entourage effect is, like I said, it's all those different minor cannabinoids and the different terpenes kind of all playing that key and lock scenario with your endocannabinoid system, fitting into
Mhm.
different spots in that lock and key scenario, and kind of just hitting different actions
Yeah.
in your immune. I'm sorry, in your central nervous system.
Central nervous system. Yeah. Now, I appreciate that breakdown because I think, this is again part of the education of just having open dialogue and conversation with folks in the industry, right? Because like I don't consider myself as a part of the industry, right? I consume, I don't grow. Like when I first backstory when I first started consuming, I would have my friends. You go buy it, you roll it up, and I'll smoke it. I don't touch it. I just I'm the end product. I'm the end user. But now that I've gotten more into it, I've took. Thank you for allowing me to take a tour of your facility. But
Yeah,
getting to see the process of all the things going into it, and it's really science. And being able to see the breakdown, being able to see the clones and the different vegetative states, and watching the process, and it's like a lot of people just assume like, oh, this is going down in somebody's back room. It's like, no, this is really a warehouse with a lot of scientists and science going on. So thank you for breaking that down for the viewers because
yeah,
again, I think
absolutely.
that just helps with the destigmatization, right? Especially you deal with older generations who are going to do the research. They're going to look into it. They're going to what's going on? Because right now we see that there's an older population that's gravitating more towards cannabis because, again, these generations have been on pills for 20, 30, 40 years, maybe. They're trying to extend their lives, they're trying to feel a little better. So I think, the younger generations, I'm a millennial, we all we care about party and feeling good. We're not going to be more into the science, but I feel like the older generations are really going to want to know that science background, what's really going on, how is CBD impacting me versus THC versus CBG, CBN. So I know we're speaking to a lot of different groups, and that's why I wanted to have that conversation because, again, we don't talk about the entourage effect enough. We don't talk about the endocannabinoid system, which obviously we all have, and so we have those receptors, which means cannabis is basically designed for us, right? Like it's something that we already have. Don't we? I think our bodies already produce some forms of,
Yeah, your body produces cannabinoids. Your
right,
ECS is there to actually receive and accept cannabinoids that your body is or should be producing.
right,
And once again, it's pretty darn new and undiscovered to medical science, but I've heard some physicians talk about, maybe the reason some people, certain physiological types gravitate toward cannabis use is that they have an underproduction of cannabinoids internally, to where
right.
their body's actually not producing cannabinoids the way that it should be. It's not
Mm-hmm.
self-regulating and achieving that homeostatic equilibrium the way that it should be.
Mm-hmm.
So when that individual consumes cannabis and they feel better all of a sudden, maybe that's part of the reason why.
Right. Yeah, that's a great thing too because obviously I think we're living in a world in a time now. In our nonprofit we deal with obviously the social justice issues of just environmental issues, right? Which have a huge impact on our overall health and well being, and I think that's where cannabis comes in, where you're going to see that impact in the community. You're going to see like we need more trees, right? So especially being in Ohio, you could drive down and see all these cornfields, and it's like, well, why aren't we growing more cannabis? Why aren't
Right.
we growing more hemp?
Right.
Which we won't dive into the hemp thing, but um, when it comes to let's say the next 5 to 10 years, where do you see since we're in Ohio? I'll ask about Ohio. Where do you see Ohio's market being in the next 5 to 10 years?
I mean, from which standpoint? Economic,
Uh, I would say all because I think
right.
economically we definitely need it, right? We need more jobs, we need more opportunities, we need better healthcare. But I think it'll help reduction of violence in communities and things of that nature, more resources. So kind of just the holistic
Yeah, I
approach.
mean, I think the Ohio market, like I said, it's I don't want to say it's slow to develop because it's developing at its own pace.
Right,
Um, but since it's been slow to develop, I think they're developing in a very calculated fashion.
right,
And I think if they make some decisions on very wisely as they're calculating how to develop this market, I think it's going to have more staying power than a
right.
market like Michigan.
Mm,
Michigan has done a lot of things very right, but it's also not a stable market
mm,
in many regards. So I think Ohio is likely going to have more staying power and be more stable over time than a
yeah.
market like Michigan or like Oregon or California, so to speak.
Okay.
But that being said, with market stability, it might be tougher to be a player in that market.
Hmm.
If they're not going to, set up a regulatory framework that's going to lead to so much oversaturation,
Hmm.
it's likely going to be tougher or somewhat tougher to participate. Now, that being said, I do think there are going to be some good opportunities to participate in the future in Ohio. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's going to be a strong market. The cannabis community in Ohio has been there forever.
Right.
It's going away. Um, so where I see it moving forward societally, I think it's yet to be determined. You
Right.
know, um, but yeah, I think it's going to be a strong market that's here for quite some time.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be very stable, and I'm hoping that yeah, it has a very very good intersection with community and with society.
Yeah. I mean, from my vantage point, I feel like Ohio's kind of maybe been upholding Michigan's market, right? Because I know a lot of people are like,
Not a
that's
doubt.
I know a lot of people, especially with our medical program, we don't have much education or like many doctors out here letting people because we can't market, right? So a lot of people don't even know we have a legal cannabis industry technically because, where are the dispensaries? You can't market, you can't advertise, you don't see, people out here actively marketing and advertising that we have a legal cannabis industry where you can get a medical card and, protect yourself in that instance. So I think that'll be huge in terms of, getting people back to Ohio and not giving those tax dollars to Michigan. As a joke, I tell people Ohio State's going to keep losing to Michigan until we get it right in the weed game, because we're giving millions of dollars to the state.
Yep.
Now we got NIL. So where do you think they're getting the money to pay some of these kids? In
Yeah, I
Ohio
mean, I think
State.
that's a big driver. I don't want to say it's the predominant driver, but it's a big
Yeah,
driver of Ohio legalizing. I think is just understanding that, the amount of Ohio consumers that are going elsewhere to purchase, namely Southern Michigan,
yeah,
is you
right,
know. I don't spend a lot of time in Southern Michigan, but I've definitely heard from people up there that you go to the dispensaries there and you see a lot of out of state plates.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, I'm sure that's a driver. But yeah, regardless, I think it's going to be a very, very strong industry in Ohio. Ohio has some very, very elite centers of research. So
mhm,
depending on how things evolve federally,
right,
if we're going to be able to get involved from a cutting edge research standpoint in Ohio, I think that would be fantastic. Once
right,
again, that's going to depend on things evolving federally.
right.
But yeah, 5 to 10 years, I see a very, very strong cannabis industry in Ohio.
Nice. And how have you seen, let's say, in terms of the business aspect, not being able to market, like how do you get your brand out there? Like how do people, is it just word of mouth? Is it just,
Yeah, I
um,
mean, for us at least, it's been mostly word of mouth.
yeah,
We don't push marketing really hard. There are a fair amount of regulatory hurdles you have to go through in Ohio, and we're
right,
not one of the companies that kind of pushes the edge on that at all. I mean, you
right,
see, we don't have like a huge social presence or anything like that.
mhm,
We're really just trying to stand on quality.
right,
We are an early mover in the state, so our name got out relatively early. But
hmm,
yeah, it's really just word of mouth and standing on quality is kind of our marketing scheme in Ohio, and it's gotten to where we are.
yeah. Yeah, I think quality is definitely, in this market is definitely important, how you grow it, because there's just so much going on, right? Like there's been I mean, I'm on Reddit every now and again, and you just see some of the conversations of, people, putting their weed under certain things to kill off, bugs or mold. And,
Yep, yep.
and again, being that you're a purist, like, but then seeing so many people hop into this industry because they think it's a moneymaker, right? Like, so, from my perspective, it's like you see all these people, or you go into the dispensary and you got folks that have never consumed weed before, but now all of a sudden it's this cool, hip thing to do, or it's a moneymaker. How do you compete with those people, or how do you,
Well, I mean, it's a different competition, really.
or,
I'm not racing the same race that some of those folks are.
mm,
We're a smaller company that's focused on quality.
right,
We're not a huge corporation that's focused on volume.
mm,
So we're playing a somewhat different game. You
mm-hmm,
know, um, we don't have the same goal set necessarily.
right, or the same pressure, I would say, huh?
Exactly. I mean, we have probably different and more pressures in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's a different goal set. You
Mm-hmm.
know, the bigger you get, the harder it is to maintain quality, is what I've realized.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's important too because obviously in the medical market, but we're seeing so many people try to do so many different things, and it's like you lose that quality. You lose that, and I feel like cannabis is something that it's such a personal thing, right? Like it's such a like you want your cultivators to be passionate about what they're doing because they understand the plant. They understand this is touching people and impacting people. So you don't want, like Walmart weed, right? Like, you know, and I think that's the beautiful thing as well is being able to, and that's why I think home grow is important, or having craft grows, or being able to allow some of these smaller, because I know people that can grow, that may not want to grow, a 100,000 square foot, warehouse full of weed. They just want to grow enough to impact their communities. And
Mhm.
I think they should be able to do that. But obviously, we still live in a capitalistic society where it's about, money, it's about return on investment, all these different things that go into it. So,
Yeah.
I think it muddies the waters a little bit in terms of, why folks are really in the industry or why they're doing it. And so I appreciate you, for being that purist and maintaining that, because I think that can get lost in the shuffle sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But at the same time, I want to be straight up with you. I am part of why I'm in this industry is to try to make a living. You know what I'm
Sure.
saying?
Yeah.
I'm not bashful of that. This is my trade. This is what I do, and this is how I'm trying to, afford a living.
Hmm.
But at the same time, I think you can just be mindful with how you go about that. you
Right.
know, and the decisions you
Right.
make very, very early on in the founding of a company. You know,
Right.
uh, I think you can be mindful with that, and that can greatly affect your trajectory going forward.
For sure. Yeah, like you said, I think that's important too. I mean, just being mindful, right? I mean, anytime we've talked social equity, right? That's something for me that is important because we've seen, again, not everybody be able to break into the industry at the higher level. Everybody that may not have, the OSU degrees. We have to understand, like, not everybody gets to go to college. Not everybody gets to have stack their resume, and have the scientific background or have the connections or relationships to find capital to be able
Yep.
to develop, but to have somebody in the industry at your level that is mindful enough to understand your privilege, where you come from, but also what you've seen, in the inner cities and some of these communities, and being able to say, hey, I want to be a part of not just, taking care of myself and my family, but also putting that nugget out there that, hey, we need social equity. We need to support, some of these initiatives. So, I mean, I want to commend you on that because one, it's not easy. I know it's not easy, business wise, because that's a stance that, some people it's tough to take. And even have the conversation around, frankly, especially here in Ohio, a lot of people don't want to touch, maybe race or, socioeconomic issues that,
Mhm.
we know cannabis is hitting all of those things. It hits race, it hits religion, it hits socioeconomic issues, it hits, pretty much the swath. It sits at the intersection of society right now, and how
Absolutely.
we even communicate. And so I think, I mean, I want to commend you on that because I know that's not an easy road to travel, especially being in your position. So definitely want to give you your flowers on that.
I mean, thanks. I appreciate you saying that, but I mean, to be real, I can't take a whole lot of credit.
Yeah.
It's always still a work in progress.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, um, once we're at the finish line, maybe we can pat each other on the back and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But it's still a work in progress.
Yeah.
Um, until it's done, we got to have that Kobe mentality.
Right. Oh, for sure.
We're not there
For
until we're,
sure.
you know.
Till
So
we
yeah,
win in
trying to be
championships.
mindful along the way, trying to leave yourself open to opportunities and
Yeah.
just be flexible on what it is you're looking to get back, from a
Right.
company and from the industry as a whole. And yeah, just like I said, being mindful to opportunities.
Yeah. All right, and then we'll go ahead and wrap it up here. What are some of the, let's say, opportunities or things that you see, um, coming online or available to other people looking to get in the industry or people that maybe already be there? Like, what are some of your ways, maybe somebody that doesn't have your background, what's some ways that folks can get involved in the industry at an entry level? Maybe they want to learn more about cultivation, growing. Maybe they want to learn more about the plant. What are some things, some resources, that you think folks should know about to help them get involved in the industry?
Yeah, of course. Well, I mean, really anybody can get involved in the industry. Um,
Right.
just about anybody can. And I'll kind of refer to what I say to a group of students I teach actually once a term in South Jersey. I go and teach at a cannabis studies class at Stockton University,
Oh, nice.
and the cannabis studies minor course. So everyone has a major in something else, but they're getting a
Mhm.
cannabis studies minor. And part of what I talk about is no matter what your major is, you likely can apply that to the cannabis industry. You don't have to get a job for a cannabis company. You can
Mhm.
still get your degree in accounting and
Right.
be a third-party accountant for a cannabis company, or an
Yeah.
attorney, or an electrician, or security,
Plumbing,
or
HVAC, marketing,
all of it.
comms.
And more times than not, those folks are going to make money way before the people that started the company are going to make money, you
Yeah.
know? So I always tell folks that, like keep going and getting your degree,
Hmm.
and if you have a strong interest in cannabis, apply that degree to cannabis, which is
Yeah.
really what I had chemistry and physics research background, and I applied that to cannabis.
Right.
Um, but as far as folks that want to get involved directly in the industry, I mean, it's just put your name out there,
Hmm.
find the companies that you have an interest in and contact those companies. And even
Right.
if they're not hiring, check in with them every so often. It's very easy to get a job as something, as entry level as a trimmer.
Hmm.
And if you have the right attitude and work ethic, you can work your way up pretty easily.
Right.
You know, I just we're starting a project in New Jersey.
Hmm.
And my first hire there, my head grower I hired started off as a trimmer at his last
Hmm.
job and worked his way up from a trimmer within, I think, 4 years to being the one running a 30,000 square foot facility. He was
Hmm.
the head individual at a 30,000 square foot facility and started as a trimmer.
Wow.
So a lot of it is just getting involved and being persistent.
Hmm.
And once you get your foot in the door, just executing,
Yeah.
because it's really easy to work your way up once you get in if you got the right attitude and the right work ethic and you're willing to learn.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. And I mean, that's something that I tell people I come across. And that's really why I started doing interviews as well, because like
Yeah.
the media, right? The education around the plant, the education around community, the education around opportunities and letting people know, like, nah, if you're good at accounting, you can still do accounting, but
Yeah, I
cannabis.
mean, this industry is still in a phase of professionalizing.
Right.
You know, you got to think about it long term. At one point, this entire cannabis economy was, underground, so to speak.
Yeah.
So there were all those professional services there that need to
Hmm.
be there as this industry comes into the light and professionalizes.
Hmm.
Legal, accounting, lobbying, um, commercial real estate, uh,
Hmm.
enterprise resource planning. I mean, there's anything you can think of that
Right.
traditional industry,
Logistics.
all of it, traditional manufacturing and retail has, that
Mhm.
all applies to this industry. And we're still figuring out how best to apply those skill sets and those trades.
Right. All right. One last thing. Do you have anything else that you'd like to share that we didn't go over? Or do you want to, you can talk about your companies, talk about how people can find you, how folks can get connected with you. If folks are looking for a job opportunities, ways they can reach out.
Um, I mean, I don't really have any particular plug for a company or anything like that. I would urge folks to reach out if they want to just have some free advice on stuff. I'm always very open to advising folks if they're trying to start a company in the cannabis space or just how they can get involved. I might not be able to help, but I'm always willing to kind of give free strategic consultation out there to folks that are looking to just better themselves in the industry or maybe start something, with a group in the industry. So best way to get a hold of me probably is just on the Ohio Clean Leaf Insta. You can message me on there. And heck, you can get a hold of me through Geo actually as well.
Yeah. So what is that? At Ohio Clean Leaf on Insta.
Yes.
And then obviously at GEO Nonprofit on Instagram is our nonprofit, which Jason sits on the board of. And I think in 2024, we could probably go a little bit harder in the cannabis space. I kind of, as the president, I've been a little bit skeptical of diving into that because we have an older population in our board. And you kind of don't want to scare everybody away, even though I'm the youngin on the team, and I'm the disruptor, I'm the rebel. Like we're going all in. But I think this year we could probably do some more since obviously the new adult use bill passed, and then medical. I think that's something that we can dive into a little bit more. So again, I want to thank you, man, for your time and
Yeah,
giving
thanks
us
for having
giving us
me.
some jewels, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. No problem. Thanks for having me.
All right, buddy. I'll talk to you later.
All right, take care, man.
Appreciate
Peace.
you. Peace.